Hello and welcome to episode 283 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert as always, Damien Fay and me, Andy Leaks. Damien, welcome back. It's a special show this week. We gave it a bit of a tease at the end of last week. How you doing?
I'm good. And Andy is talking about that we've just hit our millionth download for the Money to the Masses podcast, which is a hell of an achievement. I mean, it's something that Andy and I are both buzzing about. It's something that crept up on us, didn't it? We had been looking at the stats over time, and then suddenly it dawned on us in August we were going to have our millionth download of the podcast, which has been running now for how long? About five years.
We're in our sixth year.
Sixth year. So we're one of the original money podcasts and still one of the best money podcasts. But I'm really humbled at the fact that we've made 1 million downloads. And we're going to be doing a part of the show that's dedicated to that. So the theme of this show this week is the number 1 million. So Andy's got some things up his sleeve which I don't even know about, which is in relation to celebrating the millionth show. And then I am going to do a whole section about becoming a millionaire. So how you become a millionaire, the stats, there's some stuff in there that actually blew my mind. And I've crunched the numbers and I'm going to tell you the secret.
That's super exciting. I'm looking forward to actually a slight Freudian slip there. You mentioned that this is the millionth show. I mean, we're nearly there. We're on 283. We will get there, I'm sure, one day. If we do 10 a day, every day for the next.
Yeah, you know, it is a millionth show. Imagine that. It will do. Be the end of the world. But I'm buzzing. So shall we get on with the show?
Right. So I thought what might be fun in celebration of our millionth download is to talk about the last 6 years, really, come up with what we deem to be our favourite show, our show that we've had the best feedback on, the most downloaded show, the least downloaded show. So let's go for it. I've got a couple of stats here to start with. I've got the most downloaded show we've ever done and the least downloaded show. Would you have any clue? Maybe the subjects that they're on. We've done a lot of shows.
The least downloaded. I think the least downloaded, I think it could be in relation to, let's say, pensions. It's got a pensions angle.
Do you know what? Pensions and tax was actually really popular. When I was digging through the data, I was expecting pensions and tax maybe to finish near the bottom, not that sexy, but our listeners love it. Honestly, they do love it. The least popular episode was episode 52, which would have been back in about 2016. We were a year in. We were still fairly fresh, and it was called The Airport Shop Row and Missold Package Accounts.
Okay.
Do you remember?
I know what that would have been about. That would have been about the VAT ruse that still, I think, it goes on today. When you go into an airport, they ask you for your boarding pass and they say, when you go to the till in a shop, that is, within the airport, and you don't actually have to give it to them. And the reason they do it is because they're able to effectively keep the VAT on the sale, not have to pay VAT, and they can charge you full amount. It's something along those lines. So you don't have to give them your boarding pass, is the moral of that story.
So that's it. That's our least popular podcast. Any ideas what our most popular podcast would be?
I think it was probably something to do with, I'm going to go with a celebratory show, a show that was perhaps our 250th.
Pretty close, actually. It was a podcast that we released 2 shows after our 250th episode. In fact, the number 52 is popular because 52 was our least popular and number 252 was our most popular. And that was a show titled Sorting Your Finances and the Outlook for 2020.
Well, go back and listen to that episode because nobody would have mentioned the word coronavirus or lockdown or anything. So I'm glad we did that show because it was the outlook and that. I went back and looked at the investment outlook I did at the beginning of the year. And there were 1 or 2 nuggets in there, but it's probably the one time where pretty much everything was wide of the mark because all that matters is coronavirus. So, yeah, I'm glad our most popular show has actually turned out to be our least useful.
So there's some stats moving into numbers. Actually, I'll give you one more stat. We've got 5 countries really that stand out in terms of who listens to our content. Obviously, number 1 is going to be the UK. We're very UK focused. Can you guess what the other 4 are?
4 countries?
As in the top 5 downloaded geographically.
Okay. I'm going to go with USA.
Yep, that's in at number 2.
Canada, I reckon.
No, surprisingly not.
Okay. I know of some listeners in other parts of the world.
Think of English-speaking countries. That'll get
Hong
you
Kong.
close. No, but per population, they were high.
Yeah, because I wouldn't say that. Obviously, we seem to have expat communities.
That's it.
Seem to be key to when I notice the downloads are coming from. Australia.
Correct.
Really?
So Australia is number 3.
Australia. Okay,
Yeah.
so we're our third most listened from country is Australia. Okay,
Yeah.
and the last one is going to be New Zealand.
No, not bad though. Number 4 is Ireland, and weirdly, in at number 5 is Germany.
Germany?
Our 5th most popular country. Because there's not a massive expat community. I'd have expected it maybe to be Spain or Canaries or I don't know. But
I think there is an expat community in Germany. I knew somebody. One of my friends was actually born in Germany. It was linked to the army.
Yeah.
So therefore, maybe we've got lots of army listeners. Interesting stats, Andy.
Yeah. One last stat, our consumption rate of our podcast is just a snip over 90%. And to explain what consumption rate is, that's how much of the podcast people on average listen to. So 100%, they'd listen to every second. 90% we're at, which I compared a couple of other podcasts, spoke to a couple of other people, and it seems we're doing all right. We're doing things well.
We're blowing the doors off, Andy.
Yeah. What do you reckon the 10% is they don't listen to? Probably this bit.
This bit, the bit at the beginning, the bit at the end.
Okay, I keep saying that's the end of the stats, but I've just seen another stat here, which is quite interesting. I do love stats. I'm so sad. So if you totaled up all of the podcasts that we've done on Money to the Masses, this is including midweek markets as well, how many minutes would it take to listen to everything back to back?
For one person just to have listened to all the shows?
Yes.
I'd say, well, we've done about sort of nearly 300.
You might need to do days rather than minutes. There's
300. Let me just give a very broad number without working it out too much. I think it would be somewhere in the region of 5 days solid without any sleep or anything, just from one day to the next. It's almost Monday to Friday.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So it's just shy of 6 days. It's 5.94 days. And what I also did then is I worked it out on an average 35-hour working week. How long would it take if listening to Money to the Masses podcast was your job? It would take you a full month to listen to the podcast.
And what is sad about that, Andy, you've done that. You've listened to more than a month's worth of us talking and editing. So kudos to you.
So moving on to some of our old podcasts, and I really want to hear from you on this, actually. It'd be interesting to know the podcast that you're most proud of, maybe that's got the best feedback or the most feedback.
I think that one's quite easy. I think the Black Lives Matter podcast that we did probably about a month or two ago is the one that is a piece that I'm most proud of because it took the most work. It's the most sensitive topic you could cover. And I'll be quite frank, I feel that we're one of the only people out there who are a brand, who have an outward looking, that have a voice, that did something in that much detail. I think a lot of brands didn't do anything, and we did it in the way that we would approach everything in terms of looking under the bonnet of an issue and getting into it. And the feedback was brilliant from new listeners who'd never actually listened to us before. It attracted new listeners to our audience. And I have to say, when that show, in the build-up, it took a lot of work to do it, and the aftermath of that is probably the one show that was gone out that I was most nervous about in terms of how it would be received. Not because I thought we'd done anything wrong, but because it's such a sensitive topic, and we released it at a time when obviously it was in the limelight, that the issue. I thought that it's definitely the thing I'm most proud of, and has been also coincided with the one show that we probably got the most feedback about. And if I want to throw in another one, if I can, I think there was a section we did on a podcast. So if I had to pick one section on a podcast, it kind of covers a similar theme. I did a piece on feminist economics that looked at the economics of women in the UK and globally, but how they're underrepresented and undervalued. And that, for a section of a podcast, also got a lot of positive feedback because we spoke about an issue that is overlooked, but looked at it in a different way, actually looked at the economics of it. For example, how the value that people who stay at home, maybe looking after children, isn't included in economic output numbers. So I think that was was one. I think that was definitely another piece I was proud of.
Okay, well, this next piece may be a section of a podcast that you're probably least proud of and embarrassed about, because I'm going to throw something on you. You don't know what's coming now. In celebration of our millionth download, I've prepared a very short quiz for you to test your knowledge of our past podcasts, and it's on the millionaire theme. Okay, so Damien, are you ready to play?
I'm ready to play.
You can't say I don't prepare these things.
We've got to listen to the whole theme tune.
No, I think we're done. Right, let's turn it off. Okay, so you get the idea. It's on the millionaire theme. Question 1. In the first ever Money to the Masses episode, how did I introduce you? Was it A, a guru? Was it B, an extraordinaire? Was it C, an expert? Or was it D, a legend? So you've got guru.
Yeah, I think it's A. I think it's guru. I think you said guru.
You think I said guru? Well, I've got the clip, so should we have a listen? Well, here we are. Hello and welcome to Money to the Masses podcast, the first, and I'm certainly not going to be the last. Welcome to Damien, author, extraordinaire, whatever you want to say, really. Damien, introduce yourself.
Well, extraordinaire is quite generous. Oh, that was my backup answer, extraordinaire.
So unfortunately, Damien, if we were playing the real game here,
I'd be out.
But luckily,
is this what you've been doing all week?
but luckily, you get an extra life. We're going to carry on. Question 2: what is the title of episode 4? Was it Writing a Bestseller and the Brilliant Bananas, Writing a Bestseller and the Amazing Artichokes, Writing a Bestseller and the Perfect Pineapples, or Writing a Bestseller and the Magnificent Melons?
It's definitely the last one, because when we started, Andy had an obsession of like alliteration when it came to titles. So if it's not the last one, I'll be absolutely amazed.
It was indeed the last one. Well done. You got that one right. Okay, question 3. In episode 8, we challenged ourselves to see who could get the most value from spending £5. It specifically was £5 on the internet. We set ourselves a challenge. What did you not get as part of your £5? So 3 of these you did get, 1 you didn't. A fidget spinner, an organic pear, a cardboard cutout of one of the members of One Direction, and an FA Cup final programme. Which of those did you not get as part of your £5 purchase?
I remember now. I think it was the organic pear.
That's the one you didn't get.
Yeah, I think it was the organic pear.
Unfortunately not. It was the fidget spinner. You didn't get a fidget spinner. You did get an organic pear as part of your £5 purchase. Question 4. In episode 29, you explain money printing. What household chore do you use as an analogy? Is it doing the hoovering, cleaning the windows, putting the bins out?
Watering the garden. What could be watering the garden?
There we go. He's got it before we even got to the end. Question 5. In episode 37, we did the Lost Luggage Special. I'm going to play a clip from it now, and then we'll ask the question.
Straight away, I gave over my passport and the ticket you get. You know, when you check in and they stick a little sticker to say that your luggage you've checked in has gone to wherever it's gone, presumably Barcelona in my case. And as soon as I'd given that piece of paper to him, he just looked at me and went, yeah, it's gone to So my suitcase apparently didn't go to Barcelona but went to and now there'll be people listening to this.
Okay, so where did your suitcase go? Did it go to Venice? Did it go to Madrid? Did it go to Rome? Or did it go to Munich?
I think it's Rome.
You think it's Rome? Let's play out the clip.
That piece of paper to him, he just looked at me and went, yeah, it's gone to Rome. So my suitcase apparently didn't go to Barcelona but went to Rome. And now there'll be...
I'm mentally scarred by the whole event. So, yeah, I'm not surprised I got that one.
Question number 6. Now, our least downloaded episode was episode 52, so we got a question from that episode. In episode 52, what did you say was the most exciting thing in your life that week? Was it the arrival of your youngest daughter? Was it Tottenham had advanced to the latter stages of the Champions League? Was it Money to the Masses have moved into new offices? Or was it the erection of some scaffolding around your house?
Oh, could have been any one of those. It should have been about the arrival of my daughter, my youngest daughter. I don't think it looks like the right time, actually. I'm trying to think about the years. I'm going to say Money to the Masses moving into offices.
No, incorrect. Unfortunately, it was to do with scaffolding around your house. You're having your house renovated, and you said it was really exciting. There were men like buzzing around the windows, and it took them 3 days, and you reckoned you could have done it in about 2 hours.
God, I'm sad.
Question 7 in episode 86. What had happened to you that week? Did you get 3 numbers on the lottery? Had you pulled your hamstring?
Definitely going to be that.
Did you have an impromptu blood transfusion, or were you the victim of a scam?
Do you know what? I think all of those have happened to me. So I think it could be any of them. Oh,
See, it's like the real millionaire quiz. It could be any of the answers.
I could phone a friend, but nobody's going to know the answer to this. I'll go for impromptu blood transfusion.
Unbelievably, that is the correct answer. Just 3 more to go. Question 8. In episode 128, I called you a weirdo.
Did you?
Yes.
Did you?
So you need to work out, or tell me, why.
Did you also pull the face you just pulled when you said it?
So was it because you said you had enjoyed working a 70-hour week? Was it because you admitted to not liking chocolate? Was it because you admitted you enjoyed watching Tottenham lose that week? Or was it because you admitted that you don't enjoy taking time off work? You don't enjoy taking
I
holidays?
actually think it's number 2. B, I think it's the chocolate thing, because I think you actually just called me a weirdo again today when I just revealed that Lauren's chocolate bar that's been here throughout the whole of lockdown survived about 4 months and nobody had eaten it because I don't like chocolate. And I think you went, oh, you're a weirdo. So I'm guessing it's that.
You're absolutely right. Well done. Question 9. In episode 176, you announced that you had spent the previous week enjoying what? Wandering the streets of New York, clearing out some old toys, trying to save money on your utility bills, or looking at the fantastic returns on your 50k portfolio?
Do you know what? It's so difficult. I'm going to go in New York. I tell you what, I'm doing good at it. I'm doing well. I'm good.
You struggled at the start, but you've actually pulled it out of the bag. Let's listen to that clip.
Without the kids for the first time in ages, and just spend a few days wandering the streets of New York. You feel like you've already been there because there's so much of it we see on TV.
Okay, that was you talking about your 40th birthday celebrations with Justin, enjoying your New York trip. Question 10 in episode 252, our most downloaded episode. What did you predict? Did you predict the coronavirus outbreak? Did you predict that there was a chance of recession with warning signs showing in the first quarter of 2020? Did you predict the winner of the Premier League? Or did you predict the winner of the Cheltenham Gold Cup?
I'm positive it's not going to be anything horse related because I never seem to do very well on the horses. It can't be coronavirus outbreak because nobody saw that coming. The winner of the Premier League, not sure. It's got to be the second one.
The chances of recession. Well, let's listen to what you said.
Before I finish up on this investment theme, I want to throw out some themes to ponder. So in 2020, I still think, despite the fact that the market has completely dismissed the idea of a recession, we are still going to be talking about that at some point, probably in a not too distant future. Everybody thinks the economic cycle has turned, things are going to only be positive, then that is almost a sign that probably we're being a little bit complacent. If you look at the fear and greed index, which is done by CNN, it's like a measure, it takes about 7 factors into account, and it's a measure that goes from 0 to 100, where 0 is extremely fearful and 100 is extreme greed as the emotions that are driving markets. At the moment, it's hitting 97. I don't think it's ever been higher. And so normally, it's not necessarily a reliable indicator that the market's about to collapse. But if you take what Warren Buffett always says about fear and greed and what's driving markets, you should be greedy when people are fearful and fearful when people are greedy, then markets are being quite enthusiastic at the moment. And that's because they're dismissing a trade war escalation, they're dismissing a recession as 2 of the big key factors, but I think they are still lurking in the background. So that is something I think that if you watch the midweek market show, we're going to come back to probably within the first quarter of 2020.
Call me Nostradamus, Andy. I'm quite impressed by that. But it wasn't the coronavirus. And in fact, we've been talking about depression rather than just a recession. And interestingly, that fear and greed index, I was looking at that the other day, and it dropped way below 50, and they were now bubbling back above the levels we were in February, which is about 70 odd. So it shows you greed starting to creep back, just to give that some context.
So well done. That was indeed the correct answer. I can't remember how many you got right. Maybe about 6 or 7 out of 10. I think that's pretty good, to be honest.
I think that's pretty good. But given that it was me talking in nearly all of those clips, should have probably got 10.
So that moves us on nicely to the main juicy part of the podcast, where we're going to take that million theme and run with it. And you've been crunching some numbers, and what have we got?
So this whole piece is going to be around the idea of becoming a millionaire. And we did a podcast. I should have looked up the number. If you go back, there was a podcast in the past that we had to become a millionaire, but it was more along the things that people do. And this one is based upon the pure mathematics. Now, if I said to anybody listening to this podcast, let's assume you've not thought about putting money aside, you've not put money into a pension, and you're wanting to retire at 65, which, let's be honest, is going to be a pretty good retirement age for most people, because a lot of the people are going to have to work later and for longer. How much money do you need to put into your investments or savings a month to be a millionaire by the time you're 65? So when I floated this idea in the office about I was going to do a piece like this, everybody went, well, what's my number? What's my magic number then? So based upon your age, if you were 20, how much you need to put in a month? A fixed amount, it doesn't change, to have £1 million by 65. What about if you're 30? What about if you're closer to our age, Andy, and 40 years old? Do you know what that number could be? You've got no savings, assume.
I wouldn't have a clue. I mean, it would scare me, I'm sure. I mean, in my mind, to be a millionaire, but in the next 25 years, I'm probably looking at a couple of thousand a month, I would think. I think it's, it's a number I couldn't afford. Let's put it that way.
Well, to get to the number, there are numerous factors you have to take into account, because one of the things is the rate of return you get. Now, this is all about the wonders of compounding. And the more you look at the numbers, the more, for me, and I think for most people, my mind gets more and more blown. Now, my background is mathematics. I did a degree in maths many years ago, and playing with numbers and looking at the power of compounding. So that's when you get interest on your interest, your growth on the growth of your investments. And that snowball effect is incredibly powerful, and it's the more time you have, the more powerful the effect is. Now, what I did is I crunched the numbers looking at different interest rates and different ages. So I looked at interest rates of 1%, 2%, 3%, all the way up to 10% per annum. So your investment, assuming it got, say, 8% per annum, and you were aged 40, how much would you need to put in to get to the magic £1 million? Now, I'm going to tell you, for somebody around our age, it's actually £1,051 a month.
Wow.
So if you put £1,051 a month away every month until you were 65, you'd have £1 million sitting there. Now, I'm not thinking about taxation or wrappers, pensions, or anything like that. Just looking at the pure mathematics behind it, because I'm going to come on to that. Now, when doing these numbers, you need to focus on one particular rate of return. Now, some people may be cautious, so they're going to have cash savings. You're going to get hardly anything, 1%, 2% if you're lucky. If you are being more adventurous in investing, then you will be looking at maybe 5, 6, 7, or maybe more percentage return per annum. And that's an average rate of return. It doesn't have to be consistent. That's an average rate of return over time. So as I say, I crunch the numbers for all the permutations. So for any age, from 5 all the way up to basically 64 years old, and how much you'd have to put in a month fixed at each given interest rate. And so I'm not going to go through all of that on the podcast because it's too many numbers. But what I've done is created a crib sheet. If you go to the show notes for this podcast on our website, so if you search for podcast episode 283, you will find the article in question. In there will be an image where you could go and look up your age and the rate of return that you're going to estimate that you'll get on your savings and investments going forwards, and you can work out how much you need to put in a month. And so for that alone, this podcast will give you an answer to a question you've probably been pondering a lot. Now, it doesn't take into account any lump sums you've already got. As I say, this is for people starting from scratch. We want to be a millionaire from today. So let me give you some numbers here that will hopefully give people a lot of optimism. So I crunched the numbers about rates of returns. What is a decent or realistic rate of return on an investment, for example? Now, if you go and look at, say, the Vanguard 100% Life Strategy Fund, so it's 100% equity, then that has an annualized rate of return of around 9% per annum since its launch in 2011. Now, that's obviously very good, but you've got to realise that's been in one of the longest bull markets in history. So the market has only gone upwards because of all that money printing. So is that really a realistic representation of what you can expect over perhaps a 40-year time frame? Now, if you go back a little bit further, 20 years, the MSCI Emerging Markets Index has produced a 9% annualized return as well. More risky, but it just shows you there are indices out there that are producing the rates of return of as high as 9%. It's not outlandish. If you go and look at the Barclays Equity Gilt Study, typically you can expect about 6% return per year, and that's above inflation. So we're looking at something around 6% per annum, even nominal, is achievable in most equity markets. Now, if we go back even further and we look at the S&P 500, so the US stock market index, since 1988, it's produced an annualized rate of return of 11.44% a year. And even the FTSE 100, that is, as many people know, a laggard of late for quite some time. In fact, pretty much since the last US election, the FTSE 100 has lagged US markets massively. The FTSE 100 has achieved an annualized rate of return of 8.36%. So if you bear with me, the idea of putting your money in the long term, which you don't need for a very long time, in say a S&P 500 tracker, which is going to be incredibly cheap, has some attractions for what I'm about to tell you. I'm not recommending people do it, but bear with me. And also bear in mind that Warren Buffett also suggested to his wife, should he die, that she puts all their money into a tracker. So it shows you great minds think alike. Now, let's say you get an annualized rate of return of 8% per annum. Like I say, it's not crazy. It's based on some sound evidence. If you were 20 years old and you put in £190 per month every month until you were 65, you'd have £1 million in whatever investment you had. So that means when you're 30, you're still putting £190 a month. When your wages are going up, you're not putting any more in. So if you're starting at 30 and you've got nothing in your bank account, you have no money, then you're going to have to pay £436 a month every month until you're 65, and you too will be a millionaire. So the 20-year-olds out there listening to this, they're laughing because they've only got to do £190 a month. So less than half of what the 30-year-olds who haven't started yet have got to do. Now, if you're like me and Andy and you're near 40, in fact, I'm past 40, but we'll just say near 40.
I mean, you're nigh on 43. Let's not. I mean, you're pushing mid-40s. Come on.
Weirdo. If you are 40 and you've not put any money away, if you put £1,051 away every month from now until you're 65, you have £1 million in your investment too. I'm going to give the numbers for people who are 50 and 60. It's leaving it a bit late, but it's going to just show you the impact. If you're 50 and you've not done anything, then 50-year-olds who have nothing need to put £2,890 a month in every month until they're 65. So for the next 15 years, you're going to have to go for it. 60-year-olds are also going to have to whack in some major money. You're going to have to put in about £13,500 a month. Now, what those numbers do, they move from £190 for 20-year-olds for the rest of their working days to somebody who is, say, 40. That differential is huge, and that is the power of compounding. So the first lesson anybody who listens to this will get is that I wish I was younger and I wish I started earlier. So if you know anybody in their 20s, this is a message that they need to start putting into investments and pensions, even a small amount, because they will be a millionaire. It doesn't matter what they do in their job or whether they go and decide they want to do something they love. But if they're putting that amount away a month, then they will end up with £1 million in their investments, assuming they get 8% per annum. Now, interestingly, let's go back a little bit earlier. If you started doing this for your child, they'd only have to be putting in £84 a month from the age of 10 forever. A 5-year-old would have to put in £56 a month for the rest of their life, or till they're 65, I should say, to be a millionaire. So that power of compounding. So you can see, therefore, that the idea of putting money aside for your child, so I'm going to say a 5-year-old because my daughter's around that age. So if I was able to put it away £56 a month every month for the rest of her days until she's 65, then she would be a millionaire. And in some ways, she could take over that baton. Now, I've obviously demonstrated the impact of starting early. Now, if you just had that rate of return at 9%, which I've shown already is not outlandish over the long term, then that amount of money, I'm going to run through it. It's all in that data sheet that I've put on the post. A 5-year-old will need to put in £35 a month for the rest of their days until they're 65. A 10-year-old is £55 a month every month. £55, and they'd be £1 million in their investments when they're 65. For a 20-year-old, the number drops to £135 a month. For a 30-year-old, it's £340 a month. For a 40-year-old who's starting with nothing, it's £892, and then the numbers go up again. So it shows you that it is achievable, but obviously they are big numbers the later you leave it. Now, what is interesting is that you can make yourself a millionaire by looking at those numbers, by putting in the same amount consistently and a commitment to do that. Pay yourself first. But where this becomes perhaps more interesting is if you have children and you think of the idea of passing a baton on. So like a relay race, go back to those numbers that I mentioned earlier, the 9% rate, okay? So if you can get a 9% rate of return, let's say I'm going to invest in an S&P 500 tracker. I'm going to put £35 a month for my 5-year-old daughter, month after month, and that stays the same. Now, if I put in a junior ISA, I mean, I've never been a massive fan of junior ISAs. I think they're amazing. I think they're great products. They are tax-free, but I've always been concerned that I don't know that my own daughter is going to turn into a horror and have the money and then waste it. So perhaps that's my own controlling nature coming out there. So the products are great, I should say. It's not I don't like them, they're good. It's whether they should be able to, what they're going to do with the money once they get to 18, because it is theirs. But bear with me on this, that if you imagine that I put in £35 a month for my 5-year-old daughter now, and I'm putting in one of those trackers I've just mentioned, and we are fortunate enough to get an average rate of return of 9% a year. In that junior ISA, by the time she gets to 18, and I've been putting in that steady £35 a month, what she would then need to do is when it gets to 18, she'll have a lump sum in there. If I explain to her that really what this is doing is it's now up to you to put the £35 a month. I've basically given you a head start on this. I've given you the gift of compounding, which by the time we all realise the power of compounding, it's too late to take advantage of it. So she has been given the money compounded, which she just has to continue. She takes the baton and hopefully says, Dad, that's a brilliant idea. I'm going to carry on putting £35 a month in this until I'm older and 65, and then she'll have £1 million in her investments. Thought like that, it seems a pretty good idea, because don't forget, when they're junior ISAs mature, when they're 18, they turn to stocks and shares ISAs. So theoretically, in this example, what I'm saying is that this is all tax-free. And so who's to say when she's older that she doesn't try something like this for her children? So it's almost an intergenerational idea. I know there are going to be some people out there screaming at this podcast going, Damien, what about inflation? Inflation. Yeah, you have £1 million now and they were 5, and then £1 million when they get to 65. That's not going to be worth anywhere near £1 million. It might be nominally or notionally £1 million, but it's not going to be worth anything near that. And they're right. If inflation's at the historical rate of 2%, that £1 million is going to be worth about, have a guess,
680,000,
300 odd grand. That's the impact of
Wow.
inflation. It really starts to eat away, because just like you enjoy compounding on your investments, inflation can work in the same effective way, because the impact of inflation on your money is growing over time. It's 2% every year, don't forget. So what I've done is I crunched the numbers, and this took a lot of mathematics that I had to delve into the depths of any knowledge I have from my university days to try and work out how you counter this inflationary impact. So going back to my daughter now, if I was paying £35 a month, these are very simple rules. I like simple rules. So I wanted to make her a millionaire. I said £35 a month. I'm going to put you in an S&P 500 tracker, and that's what it's going to be. I'm not going to touch it. When it gets to 18, your job is just to carry that on. The problem is that it won't be worth £1 million. The only other rule that I'm going to add to this is if you increased her contribution rate by 7% a year, so that's way more than inflation, it counters the impact of inflation on the lump sum and the amount you're going in. Oh. So that means that if you were putting in £35 a month to start with, then in year 2, you need to increase that contribution by 7%, which means for year 2, you're paying £37.45 a month. So you can see that that is only marginally increasing it year on year, but it's countering the impact of inflation. Then what will happen if you did that? She would have around 3.3 million in her account by the time she's 65, and it will be worth about £1 million in terms of buying power in today's money. And so that does mean, if you think about it, well, 7% every year, rule of 70, if you remember we talk about it, if you're doing something at 7% every year, then that means after 10 years the amount has doubled. So if you think about it, where we end up is by the time she's 18, then when she takes over, she's got to pay £84 a month into this. Then when she's 19, it's £90. By the time she's 30, she's having to pay £190. I mean, they're not outlandish. And then by the time she's 40, she's got to be paying £374 a month. But she's going to have a massive pot here. It's going to be over 3 million, worth about £1 million in a day's money.
And by the time she's 40, that's 35 years' time. And with inflation, you would hope that,
wages will
be way
so
up.
This as a proportion of her wages will in effect be reducing as well. So there's some simple rules there that I'd like to think that some people have suddenly thought, wow, that's pretty good. I didn't realize you could do that. Now, there'll be people listening to this who think this is unbelievable. This is unachievable because an 18-year-old is not going to go and pay £80, £90 a month into an investment when there's a pot of money there and they might not have the money, or they might just not be inclined to engage with it. Now, I started to crunch some other numbers because I told you at the beginning I didn't involve taxation or pension. And there's a wonderful pension system that we have for all its flaws that you get free money from the government, but you also get free money from employers via auto-enrollment. So I don't want people to have to increase their money by 7% a year, their contributions. Let's increase my contributions at the beginning, okay? So I'm going to rejig the example slightly. Let's say my daughter's 5. I'm going to put £50 a month in to start with because it's a nice, easy number for people to remember. So you listen to this, your daughter's 5, £50 a month, and I'm going to go for something like an S&P 500 tracker. Historical rate of return way ahead of 9%, but I'm going to still base this on 9%. So I've got some wiggle room there. Then I'm going to increase my contributions by just 5% a year. So it's not going to be the 7%, it's just 5%. That's all I've got to do. Put it into a junior ISA. It's growing tax-free. Wonderful. So the age of 5, I'm putting in £50 a month. By the age of 10, I'm putting in £64 a month for her. By the age of 18, she will have £19,425 in that junior ISA. I've got 10 plus years to convince her not to blow that on something. And I've got to teach her the idea of compounding. Her obligation then would be, if she wanted to continue the project, go £84 a month now for me as an 18-year-old, and I've got to just increase that by 5% per annum. And if you did the numbers, that would mean by 30, she's paying £169 a month. I don't think that's particularly outlandish. By the time she's 40, on this same path, £276 a month. Then by the time she's 50, it's gone up to £450 a month. Now, where this is interesting is if you look at auto-enrollment. Because if you take an 18-year-old who is earning around £16,000 and they were auto-enrolled, so they have the box or they join, say, you're going to be auto-enrolled by your employer. If they just say, yeah, I am going to do that because that's a good idea. Now, at the current rate, the employee pays 5%, the employer pays 3%. Now, there are rules where there's something called qualifying earnings, which is where the contributions by the employer can be paid on just between £6,240 and £50,000 earnings. So that bit. So there's a bit at the beginning that's missed out. But employers do pay it on the full amount. So what you'd say to your child is, look, what you need to do now, you're 18, go join your employer's auto-enrollment scheme. Opt in. So you pay your 5% of your salary. Do it. But also make sure you ask them that they're going to pay you it on the full qualifying earnings. So you've got all that just that little bit of a band at the bottom included as well for the employer's contribution percentage. Might not seem like much. Now, magically, when you do the numbers, for an 18-year-old that is auto-enrolled with that sort of salary that I said, they would be having £106 put into a pension every month for them. Well, that's bigger than the 84 I've said they need to be doing to keep track of this compounding idea. But actually, they're only paying £53 of that because the employer's paying their chunk and the government's giving them the tax relief back on their pension contribution. So suddenly, this idea doesn't sound so crazy because I actually did the numbers. Well, what about when they get to 40, when they've got to pay £276 a month because they're meant to be increasing contributions by 5% a year? Based on the average earnings for a 40-year-old, I looked them up, then the contributions being made into auto-enrollment, and this is just doing the basics of auto-enrollment, not any more than you have to, they would be putting in £240 a month via auto-enrollment, of which only £120 of that they are paying. The other £120 is being paid for by the government and their employer. So they are only £36 shy of this plan that I've built up. So to recap, if I say to my daughter, she's 5, I put £50 a month in, I increase those contributions by 5% every year. So every year on the anniversary, I increase them by 5% on the previous year and do that for the rest of that year. I'm investing in a tracker that's cheap, say something like the S&P 500, where I'll hopefully get that 9% per annum. That's set up. It's in a junior ISA. She's going to have a lump sum by the time she's 18. 18, we have the conversation, explain to her. Hopefully she's buzzing about the idea of taking this forward. All I've got to say to her is, whatever you do, don't worry about the numbers. You've just got to get auto-enroll into your pension at work. Get a job, decent job that you like, just auto-enroll into your pension and make sure that they do it on your full earnings, not just on the qualifying earnings. And leave your junior ISA, which is now a stocks and shares ISA, to carry on growing. And by simply doing that, by the time that she gets to 65, she's likely to have, in real terms, £1 million. She's likely to be a millionaire. And because what I've actually done, I've created a tax-free pot. Some of it's in a junior ISA that will become a stocks and shares ISA at 18, and a whole lot in a pension. I mean, this is an ideal setup I'm talking about, but it's all tax-free. Of course, when I say things are tax-free, when you take money out of a pension, there is taxation on it. But I'm just thinking about the pot growing tax-free. But what I've effectively done is auto-enrolled her from the age of 5. Auto-enrollment doesn't work and doesn't give enough people enough money because they're not putting enough money in. The wonders of compounding works that if you increase the amount you put in, or you increase the amount of time in which you compound, that starts to have a massive impact on the final number. So what that example of how you become a millionaire, I talked about at the beginning, I gave you the notional numbers. Inflation isn't taken into account in those numbers because perhaps the day you want to get your lump sum is a bit nearer. But if it's too late for you, or you don't think you'll be able to do it, then you've got a young child. It's not too late for you to do it for them. Now, obviously, if your child's a bit older, 5, 6, 7, 8, then you just need to play catch up a bit. And because the numbers are relatively small, I say relatively, I do appreciate £50 a month is quite a bit to some people. But if they were, say, 10, you just have to work out what the contributions you should have paid to that point compounded are, and then start with that lump sum maybe, and then continue the project from there. It highlights that if I could get my daughter to appreciate the power of compounding, which I think is one of the biggest lessons that should be taught to children in schools, then she could become a millionaire just by understanding it, and me having understood it earlier than she did and enable her to take advantage of it. And one final thought I just want to leave you with before we finish this week's podcast. I looked at the average earnings for this. So it works on the basis of that they would get their auto-enrollment based on their earnings, so the contributions from their employer. And when I looked at the average earnings, it was depressing that a 40 to 49-year-old has an average earnings of £36,000 a year if they're a man. If they're a woman, if they're female, that average earnings, according to the statistics that I saw, is under £22,000 a year.
Wow.
So the idea that I've had falls apart or starts to crumble if you are female. So it raises the idea that if I wanted to do this, I've got 2 daughters. If I had a son and a daughter, does it raise the question that the world should be equal? And you might treat them equal at the start, but by putting in the same amount of months. You say you put in £50 a month for each of them at the start, but because the world isn't equal and doesn't treat them equally yet, it may change in their lifetime. I'd like to think it will do. I won't hold my breath, but I would like to think it does. Should you therefore skew your money that you're putting into your investments more towards your daughter than your son, because they're going to be disadvantaged when it comes to taking advantage of things like auto-enrollment and pension contributions and pension tax relief, because of also their wages are going to be lower because, as we know, there's a huge wage gap. So I'm throwing it out there. I'm not telling people to treat their children differently, but you can treat them equal at the beginning, but what they get at the end won't be equal. Or you could instead look at it and say, if they wanted to do something like this, could you treat them equal at the end, which means you have to treat them differently at the start. I'm just throwing these things out there. I'm not saying anybody follows the plan of what I've just laid out, but it was an idea that once you crunch the numbers, there is a way to become a millionaire, and it's all down to understanding the power of compounding and inflation. And I think that neatly wraps up, I think, some of the bits we've been talking about in recent weeks. Of course, one other thing I didn't add to that plan is that I've made those assumptions about how much people would pay in when they're at certain ages. Don't forget, if you are married or you're part of a couple and you've got joint finances, then let's say my wife and I, we end up being a millionaire. I'm focusing on my children in this example as individuals. But when you come to a point in life and you join forces with somebody else, which is more likely than not, then you can share that burden, because the £1 million for most people would be shared if they were married or in a couple anyway. So when I was talking about my plan that when she's 40, she's going to have to be putting £276 a month, well, if she has a partner, they may be putting some money in anyway themselves. So as a collective, they're easily hitting those figures. So the idea is there are ways to try and reduce the burden on the individual. You would put it onto the burden of employers, governments, partners, whatever.
Great stuff. So that pretty much wraps up our million special this week. If you want to get in touch with Damien, you can do so. It's Damien at moneytothemasses.com. Twitter is at moneytothemasses with the number 2. Head over to Facebook and be a part of our group if you can. There'll hopefully be a lot of chat about this particular podcast. I found it really interesting. It'll be interesting actually to hear other people's thoughts, what they thought about it, perhaps their own sort of experiences, whether they've set up things for their children or any other ideas they have. So it's facebook.com/groups/money to the masses.
That's it. And the message is start early when it comes to investing and often keep it simple. There's a lot of nice things wrapped up in that example. I really like it. Do leave us a review as well, because we've had a number of reviews. Let's get more reviews on the podcast. It helps us wherever you listen to them, iTunes or whatever app. Leave reviews of the podcast and tell other people about it. Oh, something important I forgot to mention. We have got limited edition million download mugs. So next week on the Instagram channel that we have, we're going to do a Friday quiz as we do every week, multiple choice. But from the people who answer the most correct answers, we're going to pick a number of people, going out of the hat, draw people. We're going to win the celebratory mugs for the millionth download.
That's it. Until next time.
Until next time.